Welcome, listeners. This is Sebastian Nothwell interviewing Noah Hawthorne, who also writes as Aelina Isaacs. Hello, Noah.
Hey, how you doing?
Getting straight into it, which of your books are you most excited to talk about today?
I think that would be The Voice of Wild Places, which is the book I'm currently working on.
What inspired this particular book?
Well, I really like historical fiction, which is what this book will be, and I've always enjoyed reading it. And I've published a lot of fantasy books, so I wanted to do something a little bit different, kind of challenge myself, which just with historical fantasy or historical fiction, it's definitely a challenge.
What have you noticed so far? Like, what's different about the process for you, fantasy versus historical fiction?
Well, you just can't make everything up, you know? You have to actually so this is set in 1930, which is any year is an important time, but I feel like there's a lot going on then. So I just want to make sure that I'm getting everything right. And I feel like another thing too that's hard is you can't ignore the bad part. So like there's a lot of discrimination going on in that time, a lot of different movements. So I also want to make sure I'm paying my due diligence with all of those. And with fantasy, you can make up everything. And there, yes, there has to be a rhyme and reason and some logic to it, but in the end, it's a fantasy world. So I feel like that's the biggest
I have found the absolute opposite to be true because I
thing.
struggle with fantasy because, like, if I want to know how the world works, I have to say how it works. I can't just go look up how it was working at that time.
Yeah, I mean, that is very true. I like world building, I think it's pretty fun, but it also can lead you into some like, well, I never thought of this, and now this is something I have to deal with. And like you say, you can't just look it up. You have to figure out how you're going to deal with it. So that is very true.
Yeah, you have to work out all the logistics on your own.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I get told often that there's a lot, there's a lot going on. So that also may be a little bit of a problem too, but I don't know. I like both.
I mean, there's also a lot going on in historical fiction, as I'm sure you're finding out, trying to balance all of the world events of 1930 into one single book.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and it's like a time period where it's straddling the two world wars, it's right before the second one. And so there's a lot of tension and stuff. And like something as simple as, okay, how are they going to get from A to B? They're going to use a steamship. Well, a few months later, a lot of steamships are shot down by submarines and stuff. So it's just, I don't know, a lot of things I'm learning where I didn't realize were a thing just by researching something simple, like travel or what kind of ships they would have used, which is kind of cool, I think.
Yeah. Do you find the research inspires you to take your story into places you weren't quite expecting?
Yeah, definitely. Originally, the characters, it was all going to start in Michigan, but now I moved it to Pennsylvania. And in doing so, or in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and in doing so, I was like, well, what was the queer scene like then? And I learned a lot about what it was like, and it was really cool. And I actually found like an actual speakeasy that still runs today, like as a regular bar and restaurant and stuff. And I didn't have a specific place in mind. And then once I started researching, what the scene was like, what places there were, it kind of directed me to a spot like, oh, okay, I'm going to do this here now because of what I learned. So yeah, I definitely think after I started researching, it changed the flow of things, I guess you would say.
That is very cool that you get to discover parts of our own queer history in writing this story.
Yeah, it was, like I said, so one of the characters is a trans man, and being trans in 1930 looked a lot different than it does today. And another thing with that too is if you wanted to get care, it was being somewhat developed, but it was over in Germany, which in 1930 was a hard place to be. And the guy, Magnus Hirschfeld, I believe is his name, who developed all these treatments and stuff like that, like on the one hand, he did a lot for trans people and queer history, but on the other hand, he was a Zionist.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so it's like, how do you deal with that in history? And how do you deal with that in the book? So it was just all things I never knew. I didn't really go back that far in queer history. Like I know Stonewall, I know like the 60s and 80s and stuff like that and today. But if you think about it in 1930 or 20s or even farther back, it just, I don't know, what would it have been like to be a person without hormone therapy or without easily accessible surgery or surgery that didn't result in you getting sick and dying because surgery back then wasn't the greatest. Yeah, it's just, between that and then so yeah, the bar was Maxine's and I learned a lot about that. Not just what the scene was like, but like the street, right down to the street is paved with these wooden pavers. And the whole street was a really like a hot spot. for queer people, for people of color. And it's just not something I would have thought of queer people having, a hot spot in 1930, but they did.
Yeah, throughout history, we have always found each other.
Yeah. And I mean, even, we've discovered that there were queer people a lot earlier too, but it's just, to me, it's really interesting in this time period.
Yeah. Overall, what would you say drives your storytelling and motivates you to write?
Initially, I started writing because I was discovering myself and kind of exploring, I guess you would say. Like the first book I wrote was quote unquote safe. Like it was all heteronormative, but the side characters were queer. And then what I did was I started writing these side stories, these novellas focusing on these side characters, the queer characters. And then after I wrote my first book, it really just kind of unlocked something in me. And I started connecting with this community that I didn't know that I had. And just all of that kind of combined together is what's fueled me to write stories like this. I just want to write stories where there's people like me, which I know sounds really cliche, but and I don't mean that just with being queer. Like a lot of themes in my books are, found family, the family you choose, being a misfit, being disabled and living with that, or just learning how to be an adult later in life. Those are all things that I struggle with. And I just like to see in the books that I read. And I want that to be the books that I write, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. It is vital to see ourselves reflected in the culture around us and in the stories.
Yeah, I think when I first began getting back into reading, like I used to read a lot when I was younger, and then I didn't for, like 5 years. And then when I first got started, I was kind of frustrated because there wasn't that diversity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I guess initially, very initially, it was frustration. And then that led to exploring, discovering, writing, kind of, figuring out what I want.
Yeah, and I think that's a story that a lot of authors, particularly in queer subgenres, find is that they discover themselves through their writings and discover, oh, there's parts of myself that I've been locking away that through writing I've unlocked, and now I can be more authentically myself in my waking life.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I was like, there's this whole side of me that I haven't really explored yet. Let's get into that. And then other people connect with that because they have the same struggle too.
Absolutely. Do you have a favorite character you've created?
I think one that's really close to my heart is a character from my first series. He's like a troublesome vagabond bard who's just a cinnamon roll. And I kind of imagined him with this like Robin Williams demeanor where he's very happy on the outside. He makes everybody else happy, but really he's really struggles internally. And I just always really loved him. He was the first queer character. His novella was the first gay story that I wrote, so it's just very special to me because of that. He goes through a lot, so his name's Novak, and he's really important to me. And then I think next would be Arlo because a lot of myself is in him. Phantom and Rook was supposed to be kind of a self-indulgent. I'm gonna write exactly what I want. I don't know if it's going to do good, but I need a book with a struggling adult with depression. He, likes to indulge in his herbs and he's just very unconventional and he's trying to learn how to be an adult. And I am always really connected with Arlo because of that. And he's just really a great character. I really love him. And he's like, the dad. He adopts all these people and he just takes them in. He just wants to take care of everybody. So I think he's my favorite because of that.
He seems to have resonated with a lot of readers as well. People seem to really connect with that book in particular.
And I never really discussed diagnosis or anything like that. It's just, so with Arlo's story, the book begins, it's a year after a suicide attempt because he dealt with really serious PTSD, depression, and things like that. And it's him trying to figure out how to learn how to live. And he's in the book, he's 100, but in my mind, he's like 30 or 40, middle age. And we don't really talk about that a lot. People that didn't really start their adulthood until, for one reason or another, they never really got to do that until later. And a lot of people really seem to connect with that and connect with him struggling, but also living and doing his best and still finding happiness, even if he's not happy all the time. You know what I mean?
Exactly. What stories inspire you?
As I said before, I like historical fiction. I also like it when they have a dash of like magical elements to it. There's a lot of great books that I read growing up too that were not like that. The Book Thief, I think, is one that a lot of people might know. Recently, I think my first trans book was The Sunbearer Trials by Aidan Thomas and Cemetery Boys. So those books made me cry because if I had had those books when I was a teenager, life would have looked a lot different for me. And it just makes me happy to see that young people have that now. So those also kind of really inspired me to just be my authentic self because there are people out there that want that story. I got told a lot queer books don't do well and that woke is broke. And so seeing other authors like that really inspired me. So, Aiden Thomas, Andrew White, things like that, people like that.
Absolutely.
I also really love The Tarot Sequence by Katie Edwards. That series, I have read and listened to it over a half a dozen times. And it's just, it's a story of a survivor and his found family. In case you can't tell, I'm a sucker for that. And it's just each time I read it or listen to it or talk about it, it just kind of changes my brain chemistry a little bit and makes me happy that there's a story like that out there. But yeah, that's my other one.
That's beautiful. What's the number one thing you want readers to take away from your books?
Everyone's happy ending is different.
Oh, that's good.
Like everyone's happy ending is different. And so it's not what you expected, and even if it's not the happy ending you planned, it's still good for you. And maybe you're not happy all the time, and that's okay. And maybe you and your family aren't the closest, but that's okay because you have your friends and your chosen family and you belong and you deserve to exist. I think those are themes that I'll really try to hit home in each of my books. Like, you are not alone.
That is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, and just everything's gonna be okay, Sebastian.
You know what? When you say it, I believe it. What drew you to your subgenres?
Treasure Planet.
I feel like that was a formative experience for a lot of queer folks of our generation.
It really was. All those movies, Treasure Planet, Atlantis, just I love fantasy. I love epic fantasy, the traditional stuff, but I like it fantasy most when there's a twist on it. And I try to do that in each of my books. Like I started off with steampunk, but it wasn't just steampunk, it was dark steampunk. For Phantom and Rook, it's a cozy urban solar punk fantasy. For the Rebel Foxes, it's like dark dystopian 1920s. Like you can't describe any of them with just two words. Like they're all a little bit of this or that, and I like it when books are like that as well. They've just got a twist on it, you know what I mean? So I think that's what I like most is getting in the most niche subgenre as possible because like I said before, you can do anything with fantasy and let's kind of make it unique and something new and different.
Yeah, and the more specific to yourself and the more specific to the story you tell you can make it, the more I feel like appealing it is universally in this weird like converse relationship.
It is. It's like, oh, this really niche thing. There are definitely other people that like it out there and they are looking for exactly this.
And they've never had it before because it is so niche.
And I think what drew me to cozy fantasy was I just finished working on my dark fantasy series for a long while, and it was really rough, and I needed something wholesome. And like I said, originally, Phantom and Rift was supposed to be just this satirical, funny, self-indulgent thing, and it still is funny and stuff like that, but it's ended up being a lot more intentional and meaningful and full of substance than originally intended.
There's also kind of like that layer to comedy or comedic themed works where like the comedy and the lightness kind of disarms you and allows you to like dig into deeper themes underneath that because you've already kind of opened the door with something lighter, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it builds that emotional connection. You know what I mean? You can't just dig right into the dark, deep stuff without having a little bit of comedy in there and making you like what's going on and feel happy and disarmed, as you say.
Kind of lets the reader let their guard down
Yeah.
and open themselves up to other themes.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for aspiring authors?
I know it feels like it, but it's not a race. And you're going to regret it if you try to rush your stories and rush what you're doing. Find a community of other authors. I really feel like in the past really year, settled and confident in what I'm doing because I have this little group, this little writer community, and I just feel really well connected to other people. And it helps when you're having problems or anything like that. It helps you keep relevant. And I think you're a better writer when you connect with other writers, you're reading in your genre, you're reading other indie authors if you're an indie author. So I think that's really important. And like I said, just take your time. If you don't have a lot of resources, that's okay. I like to think I'm building my backlist, but just get it out there. And people are gonna love it. My first book, I look at it now and I'm like, how did I get anyone to read this? Like I did my own covers. Did my own covers and the editing was horrible. Like, but people loved it. I still have readers all the way from, years ago when I released that first book. And just you will find people and you will get better and just start and take it easy.
Yeah, co-signed.
That's what I wish I could tell myself from back then, you know? It's okay, baby author. Slow down.
It's okay, past Noah. You can do this. You got this.
Oh, yeah, it'll be okay.
Thank you for joining me, Noah. This was an absolutely wonderful conversation. And where can people find you and your work online?
You can find me at Neshama Publishing. That's Neshama Publishing.com. All my social media is also under that. Yeah, I'm in libraries, Libby, pretty much everywhere. But yeah, just come hang out, even if you're not up for reading. I do a lot of like book recommendations. I like to prop up other indie authors. So it's a good time.
Awesome.
And thank you for having me. It was a good chat and I really enjoyed it. And I'm excited to do more of these.
Excited to have you back very soon. Stay tuned, listeners.